All right, folks. This is Kali Akuno, Cooperation Jackson, doing my final report from COP27. Today I want to do a little different style and give you all a kind of a direct taste and some commentary of the COP. It's starting to wind down. What you see behind me, this is the It Takes Roots delegation space. This has been our main kind of office space, operating space for the last 2 weeks. Give you a good shot of it if I can manipulate it, so you can kind of see some of what's going on and get a little feel. Most of it's been kind of taken down. Get a little feel of what's been going on and what's been happening. Definitely been one of the more lively spaces in the COP, I think, without question. And here are some of the other ones. Let me see if I can figure out how to turn this camera around. You guys have to bear with me. There may not be a way to do it, actually. So you have this weird kind of dynamic where you'll see me walking around. And I'll try to angle it in such a way that you can kind of see more of what's going on, what it looks like. And this space, this is called the Blue Zone. This space is where most of the country pavilions are, and where major civil society groups are situated. And I wanted to show you all this so you can kind of see what, for those of you who couldn't be here, which is the vast majority of people, get a sense of the environment, and if it looks like a big kind of exhibit, it's because it is. It's a demonstration of wares, if you would, like a sales convention. That's not by any coincidence in any form or fashion. Just to give you a sense. Keep swinging it around. Sorry for how crazy it might look. And this is a massive complex. And then there's another space called the Green Zone, which green zones traditionally, have been more of or at least started off as a space more where civil society used to be, and it's become more and more a space dominated by corporations, more so than what this space is. Now, corporations are here, all over the place, but mainly as endorsers of different pavilions. Bloomberg, Meta, i.e. Facebook, is one of the primary ones. Coca-Cola is here giving away free drinks, or they were, at least for a while. For most of the COP, just passed by Germany right now. This is their pavilion. Now coming up to where the European Union, their pavilion is. You see this big Act Now sign, with all the listing of all their different kind of side events and things of that nature that they do. Over here behind me, on this other end, this is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They have a whole huge block where their pavilion is. See all this basic empty space, no chairs for the millionaires, and just. And if you're wondering how much these spaces cost, these things, which like you see behind me, several of them cost millions of dollars. Millions. So folks are clear in terms of organizations or countries having space to sit and present their views and presentations and proposals. And this is where, if you kind of camp out every once in a while, you can actually meet a delegate from one of the countries and have a conversation with them and, raise certain demands or concerns with them. So when you hear about us being here trying to intervene, remember the primary way that those interventions are made. This is Bahrain, behind me over in this corner. And I'm just walking you around so you can see as much of it as possible. But since this process is dominated by nation states, the primary thing is to try to intervene with the countries, with their delegates, to insert various language positions into the negotiations, into the body of the text, into the framework, which then becomes the agreement that the countries are supposed to be adherent to or abide by. Now, what I've been saying and many have been saying about why, in many respects, this is a joke, is because none of this is legally binding. Right? The COP process is a voluntary process, and you can thank primarily the United States for that, where they eliminated any legal contractual obligations from the process. They did that in Paris. They had been pushing it long before. But Kyoto, which was the agreement before the Paris Agreement, that was what's called a binding, a legally binding agreement. Trying to structure emissions and a way of penalizing countries and corporations, which was somewhat included in that process, for their failure to adhere to emission standards. Now that collapse, and is out of that is where the Paris Agreement basically was constructed. But unlike Kyoto, it was not binding. And that's what we are here now, 7 years later. They're still trying to finish the text, basically, of how that agreement is supposed to be implemented on a voluntary basis. So, take that fact into deep consideration. Now, where I'm at now, this is the official space viewing climate change. This is one of their pavilions, and it's right across. We've been right across from the and watch this few weeks. And I'm bringing you here because, right, some of the main sponsors of this very clearly are Bloomberg. And if you look right behind me over here, let's see if I can get a good view of it. It's Meta, Facebook. This is not the only one that they have a space in. Both of them are also very prominent at the at the United States pavilion, at their space. Big time sponsors there. Here's our main host space. You see their activity. This is Egypt. and its pavilion, which occupied a very prominent and central space. Um, and then, the smaller ones are what we've been occupying, right? And many other organizations. And there are hundreds of these that are out. Um, Most of the smaller ones, civil society organizations. But this is also where the smaller ones have also been where corporations have been situated. Now, to give you an understanding of some of the centrality of how this is played out, here's Africa Pavilion, for you to kind of check out. Right next to the Egypt Pavilion, very strategically delivered. You get a sense of who some of the sponsors are, etc. And I want to take you to this, so you get a sense of who's behind the Egypt one. Get a good look. Different corporations. Get a good look. So you understand the players involved. So there's Vodafone, Microsoft, Boston Consulting Group, Mobility Principal Partner, which is General Motors and Mansour, Infinity Power, Egypt Air, part of the Star Alliance, member, which I think, the United States, the main one there is United. Of course, Bloomberg and Bloomberg Philanthropy, Afrimix Bank, Royscom Construction, and then partners, right? So that was main partners, and then lower partners, IBM, Siemens, the German company, and then supporters, right? Lower level of financial support. Siemens, Sodic, Coca-Cola, Cisco, Google, Maastricht, Adicero, and Hasmala Holding. So, the beauty of that is that, you know, it's transparent in terms of alignment, interests, and who paid the millions of dollars to have that pavilion and have their interests represented very clearly in what Egypt and its allies and partners are trying to do. And this is everywhere. I wanted to take you to see another one. This is the Mediterranean Pavilion. Over here, you walk in to see many other parts which are more state-based than corporate-based, but you get some sense of them. Get a good look. And this is just where I'm at right now. Basically, there are 7 of these large pavilions, and then many other kind of breakout space, um, where the official delegate meetings are, where the representatives are. Their space, hosting the next one, so folks are clear about that. And these things go on. They go on. It would be easier and better if I could flip it around so you can see. But, just imagine being here, walking around in this space, and getting a good look at this. And, just get a real good look at part of what's out there and what these look like. Some of this stuff looks like 5-star hotels. And mind you, all of these were constructed specifically for this COP. And each one, they have these pavilions, and each one, they basically construct all of these from scratch, from the beginning. From scratch, not from scrap, but from scratch. And ask yourself, what happens with all of these materials? Is this left here? Is it used? The thing I've been noticing, all these display screens and TVs, all of the spots come with TVs. Are those left to be used for educational purposes? So it's a tremendous amount of conference focus on climate change, with waste being all this production being major sources of emissions, and all this waste. You would think that they would figure out another way to be in line with their goals and objectives to do this than how they have been doing it. But something for everybody to view. Give you a good thing. Here's a big promotion of what the UE's what they're citing as major decarbonization sites and initiatives. What they put up and put out there, what they have on display. They're assigned renewable energy, alternative energy industry, infrastructure. What they're promoting and putting out, and take a good look. And here on this side, where the Emirates are, it's a timeline of kind of their orientation and achievements and where they see and include themselves in this process. So 1992, 96, 97. 97, you notice, we were just talking about the UAE ratifies the Kyoto Protocol. They're showing you the Abu Dhabi mangroves, below. 99, federal environment law is issued. We move up to 2002. Global Data Environmental Initiative is established. Some of their building and construction projects that they want to tout, look at. Some of the things that the Emir 2008 Zayed Sustainability Prize was established. UAE hosts its first Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week. This goes on. Take you through 2009, 2010, 2011. And it goes all the way up, basically to the present. You see they cite more and they accelerate from 2008 on the pace of developments that they put in here, post that time. And it goes all the way to the present day. Some things that they're including solar power plant 2015 award, offshore wind in the United Kingdom with their site, they had some Sorry about that. We're back. It's in a terrible area. Unfortunately, the internet has been a problem, as you all know. It's definitely interrupted my being able to broadcast and bring you stuff on a consistent basis. It made it hard and challenging to schedule interviews with folks, or got to rip and run, trying to make their interventions, trying to make their meetings, etc. Yeah, I think this area just may be a bad zone, unfortunately. But I really wanted to highlight and take you all through that particular one, since that's going to be the next host. For folks to really see and get a sense. They are across, the UAE is across from the United Kingdom, what you see here. See if I can get a good look, breakdown of it, so you see what's going on here. The United Kingdom is one of the only places that's brought up, one of the only countries, I should say, that's brought up the case of political prisoners. That being part of the whole piece, they brought it up. Nothing on that was mentioned by the United States, which, of course, in many respects would have been somewhat ironic, given the number of political prisoners, prisoners of war, and political exiles from the United States that it refuses to deal with. But just something to, for everybody to note about some of the conditions, the things here, the issues that have come up on an international scale here in Egypt surrounding this COP. But one of the things that you've heard us mention that's been a struggle in all of these COP negotiations, but particularly since Paris, is even though the United Nations is the body, here's Japan, their pavilion, and what's going on now. Even though the United Nations much Yeah, so sorry about the interruption. But as I was saying, when we thought it was just Egypt, they had all the corporate sponsors, South African sponsors there. Not going over that right now. But the point I was making before I get interrupted with the break in the internet, that even though the United Nations is the one that's hosting this, human rights are being as I was saying, the United States leading the charge against human rights being included as a key component of implementation around climate change. And you can imagine, I'll state some of the reasons that if human rights are actually included and observed, that all the existing both treaty rights and frameworks around economic, social, and cultural rights, and all the pieces around them being respected, protected, and implemented, then fall into the equation, and people, particularly indigenous people, have a different relationship with this process and actually would be afforded certain rights that would then have to be observed. And so they don't want to include that because at its heart, we need to understand what this process is. You've heard me say it before, and I'll just repeat. This is a site, this whole process, this whole conversation is a process of capital formation. And what is being fundamentally negotiated here is the construction of new commodities. Behind me is the U.S. Center. There's some presentation going on. Here's the SGA pavilion, which is sustainable development for those who might not be familiar. Those and this piece around development is a critical one in these conversations, very much attached to all the different key things that are being negotiated this COP, around damage and loss, finance, mitigation, very critical to that process. But I want to come back to that one point around human rights, and why it's being, vehemently denied here, and tie it into what I said. This is being a site of capital formation, and I mentioned that what they're doing to create new commodities. Like that's fundamentally what this process is about. It's always been about, in truth, because this follows capitalist logic and what they're fundamentally aiming to do now is just implement a whole host of techno fixes, to kind of resolve the crisis, because fundamentally they are very clear that in order for climate change to be addressed, you have to deal with the system of capital. And they are very intent, the nation states, as they are now presently constructed, are very intent on keeping things the same, not changing anything, and just think that they can tweak what's going on and mitigate some aspects, creating these new market mechanisms, carbon markets, and the like, that then provide incentives, right, for something else with either green technologies in the whole punish or unsustainable decision. That's what this is. And we have to be as a side of it's at this point process. We need to be real and have to influence a few of our social movements right now have any cash except Okay, we got cut off. Sorry about that. Sorry for the choppiness of this for those who are going to be watching this later on. But as I was saying, where there are movements that have some cachet with their national governments to be able to sway, those are few and far in between. The vast majority of these governments that are negotiating this, they're not liberal democracies for whatever that's worth. They're fundamentally authoritarian regimes that are being constructed and propped up by the West, as leftovers from the period of our collective history of European colonialism, which structures the nation state. That's what created this whole world system. That's what created it. That's what still underscores it. And even with rising powers like China contesting some aspects of it, is still very much within that framework and operating by those rules. It's trying to change and break some here, but even it breaks fundamentally to operate within the logic around capital accumulation, which in their case is framed as development and the right to develop. So we're going to have to find some new ways to intervene. I've always maintained that our outside game, to use this inside-outside analogy, our outside game has to be stronger than our inside game. And right now, our outside game is weak, which means that our inside game is weak. And I think we just need to be real about that. In my view, this has been kind of the most ineffective COP, at least from a left social movement perspective, than ever. And while we may have, at some point, sharpened up our demands to meet what was being agreed upon in discussions around mitigation, damage, and loss, gone is any serious conversation about opposing things like reds. Gone is anything articulating the demand around keeping it in the ground. Gone is any clear kind of articulation about remaining at 1.5, which is one of the key components of the Paris Agreement. And part we have surrendered that. It's one thing for these countries to kind of move on, since nothing is binding. They can just kind of keep making stuff up as they play along. But for us to basically give up certain key things is a bit of a dereliction of duty, and we're going to have to really, I think, question ourselves, about continuing to come here, particularly looking at the next one, which is going to be in a place perhaps even more restrictive than where we currently are at. We're going to have to figure out some new ways to intervene. I, for one, think the left-leaning social forces that are here, it takes roots to DCJ and beyond. Number one, we're going to have to plan, coordinate, and be on the field of struggle, joint struggle with each other in between these COPs. We need to make sure that we come together, I think, over the course of the next couple of years to really hammer out the concrete program that we can implement on the global level, which will have to entail massive ways, as I said, at the points of production, at the points of distribution, and at the points of consumption, and then really take charge to the greatest extent possible at coming up with our own clear processes of recycling, reusing, and reducing as the kind of fourth component, the fourth leg of that particular piece, to make these critical shifts. One thing that I think has come up where we might have some leverage, to think about, and this is kind of a raw idea, something I've been thinking about the last 24 hours. Lula was here as the new president-elect of Brazil. Brazil is getting back into the process because, in effect, Bolsonaro did like Trump and abandoned the process, took Brazil out. under his term of office. And so he came to announce that he was back, and then he made this particular kind of request that one of the next COPs be in Brazil. But I want to, I'm going to try to write something up to ask our partners primarily in MST and La Via Campesina and elsewhere, in Venezuela, the coup, to take up that piece and for us to start setting up, I wouldn't call it a counter COP, but for us to set up direct form of planned intervention leading into the COP that changes the conditions and changes the conversation that was negotiated. And another key component, I think, of what we should try to aim to do, Lula also said here, that many of the institutions that were developed under, his 10-year term of government, the prior term of government, that those were gutted and basically destroyed under Lula's 5 years, under Bolsonaro's 5 years, and that they need to be reinstituted and reconstructed. And I'm thinking that this might be a practical area where we can set up some infrastructure, maybe on a volunteer basis or in some form of collaboration, if you would. That would have to be hashed out with forces on the ground. But create international brigades that could go and help be a supplemental force or a leading force. That would be up to, again, the forces on the ground. Where we intervene directly in the preservation of the rainforest. Because one of the things that's always been a challenge there is having enough people, to kind of monitor what the ranchers and the loggers and folks of that nature, poachers, etc., are doing to the rainforest. Our movement abroad could use that, I think, as a point of intervention in the training school. That we have to start making critical interventions, any and everywhere, and to train a new generation of folks in the direct applications of civil disobedience struggle, and in a broader sense, governance. I think really kind of taking up some of the better practices that many of us, including Cooperation Jackson, have learned, from the MST. So, that's one of many proposals and something I'm going to be putting out for us to really look at as a movement to consider, how we deal with this. Another idea, I think, Pablo Salon has been doing this piece around these earth assemblies, and I was just briefly been talking about that with Tom Goldtooth, and I agree with his assessment. I think it's a great idea, a great concept, but it's got to get some more buy-in from forces on the ground for us to build the real kind of counters. And I'm coming at this because I think, one of the things that's been clear about this piece that we have to really challenge ourselves on is that we have to build and practice the legitimacy of the things that our movement creates, and the tools that we create. So, the Cochabamba Accords, the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth, modern that. I think in many ways we need to pick progressive governments to kind of lend support, but just be very clear about what our movements have to do, whether we have someone in office who speaks our language or supports us in part or in whole. We have to build that up, and I think we need to pick up from where that particular process kind of left off. And there were conferences that were held in South America building on that, which had be involved in and produce some good framing pieces, which I agree with Max Isle that still some of the most practical, concrete, and revolutionary proposals that have been put out there. But we need to build the body of implementation through our social movements to engage on our own terms. Because right now, just trying to engage in the terms of these COPs and the nation is a losing game for us. Because we don't have our outside game. As I mentioned, we don't have our built strength. And we can do that. I mean, there's enough forces in and around on a global scale where we can make interventions problem of the leftist per se people. Now we need more, but one of our deepest problems is we aren't coordinated. We're still in single issue silos or identity silos, and we have to come together. We don't resolve those different things or those issues, but we got to find some common ways to engage on unified fields of struggle to be able to really to contend with the forces of capitalism, imperialism, on a concrete, material, political basis. So I'm gonna end there again because I've been trying to a lot more to say, but I've been trying to keep these basically, to about 35 to 40 minutes. We're right past. Presentation I showed you some context of what this thing is, how it moves, how it operates, how this one in particular has been defined. It's been more defined in these spaces than any other ones. You got to remember many of the other COPs like Scotland, Glasgow, which happened last year. There was the social movements primarily engaged in spaces outside of the COP, not within it. And this one, outside of the green zone, another space similar to this one, everything has been on the inside. And that's a limitation primarily because of the situation that exists in the political dynamic of Egypt right now. And as we mentioned before in the first one, it's very clear that they're going to go to places where there's going to be as least opposition as possible for them to just decide on what they're going to decide in these conversations and then impose it upon the rest of us. And that's why we need to make sure we build up a real sufficient outside strength to build and fight, to build the alternatives that we need and fight all the bad bullshit that they're trying to impose upon us. So stay tuned. Be on the lookout for some more written stuff coming from this, from experience, both a summation, but also some ideas, potential for action that people can accept or reject. But we will put them out there for folks to consider. And with that, this is Kali Akuno signing off for Cooperation Jackson, for the Institute of Social Ecology, and for the broader delegation that I came with, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance in particular, but also the broader It Takes Roots delegation that was here. Tomorrow is going to be most of our last day in the process of this round of negotiation ends, but the struggle continues.